we'll go ahead and get started. I think, yep, looks like we're rolling. All right, like Jackie said, we're going to talk a little bit today about the management of fruit-bearing trees, bushes, and vines. This is something that I get a lot of calls from homeowners about. So, um, needless to say, I wish we were all in person talking about this, and but we're going to go with the best we can. And I will apologize too that this is a very broad-based. I mean, you could have individual talks on each one of these easily. Each one of these species we're going to talk about today. So, just some learning objectives. Learn the basic management of commonly grown fruit trees, bushes, and vines. Lots of general information here. What you need to know about each species. The importance of knowing your plant hardiness zone. Depending on where you are in the state, that's not just applicable to fruit trees, but just any ornamental plants or vegetable plants in general. Facts and things to know about each one. Proper soil fertility and how to plant these species. Wherein that lies, assessing soil pH levels, proper planting, when and how to fertilize is a really big question that I get a lot about fruit trees and things like that. And proper pruning techniques, tons of pruning questions. And then obviously pest management is always a hot topic when it comes to fruit tree management. So just some general information. This is something that you need to know where you are on this plant hardiness zone map. This is basically the areas in the state where plants have the best chance of survival and growth, and it's basically based off of the average minimum temperature that a plant will tolerate. Where obviously down in South Georgia, it does not obviously get as cold there as we do here, where we are in Stevens County, or even up in the North Georgia mountains here in Union and Towns County and Rabun County. So basically what this really means is when you're purchasing plants, whether it be fruit trees, bushes, or even ornamental plants in general, especially, obviously these perennial plants, you need to be paying attention to if these plants are hardy enough to survive where you're wanting to plant them. You don't want to obviously plant a blueberry plant that's, that is adapted to growing down here in South Georgia or down here along the coast up here in the North Georgia mountains. So that's something, you need to be paying attention to when buying plants. And taking soil samples prior to planting any fruiting plant, and that obviously applies to any plants in general. Take soil samples; they're worth the money that you put into them if you want to get a good result. So some common fruits grown here in Georgia. Obviously, we have lots of different trees. I'm just going to kind of cover for the essence of time more of our basic ones. Peaches and nectarines are pretty close in family, so we'll kind of talk about them in one category. Apples and pears, they're more or less kind of grown in the same way, so we're going to talk about them kind of together. Figs and pecans, we'll briefly hit on those. In the bushes and vines category, we have blueberries, blackberries, muscadines, with blueberries being our biggest here as far as commercially in Georgia. And one thing you need to understand about fruit trees and fruit bushes or anything that produces fruit, some require a lot more management than others. So it's good to do your homework prior to, and hopefully this presentation will give you a little, sorry about that, I had a call. Hopefully this presentation will give you a little idea of, what you can, select and how much, depending on how much you're willing to put in or management time you're willing to put in. So some general info on peaches and nectarines. Overall, the management intensity for growing peaches and nectarines is overall pretty high. Um, Sunlight needed. They need to be planted in areas where they can get at least 8 to 10 hours of sun a day. Are they self-pollinating? This is a question you'll see kind of a reoccurring theme throughout this presentation of kind of these same things, and these are important things to know if you're going to plant any type of fruiting tree. Sunlight requirements. Are they self-pollinating? Meaning, will they produce fruit on their own, or do they need to have cross-pollination by another variety? Uh, it's important to know, and that way you'll know this. So um, it's important to purchase peach trees from reputable nurseries. I know they sell them at Tractor Supply or Home Depot or wherever. I'm not saying those aren't um, quality plants or anything by any stretch, but um, it's important to know where you're getting your plants from and if they're a quality product. Meaning, most of our peaches and apples, most of our fruit trees, well, peaches and apples especially, are produced with they're grafted onto a rootstock, meaning that rootstock has a specific genetic ability, whether it be resistance to root rot disease issues, nematode issues. Um, a lot of these peaches that you buy at like Tractor Supply and things like that, they're just grown from seed. Um, Not saying you can't get a good peach tree from seed, but you get a lot more of a quality plant when you buy from a quality nursery on good rootstock. So also, it's important to pay attention to chill hour requirements. This all goes back to variety. You need to make sure you're buying a variety that will be, that your chill hours, meaning the hours between 35 degrees and 42 degrees, will be fulfilled during, the fall and winter. If not, you won't get good fruiting from peaches and nectarines. So that's definitely something you need to consider. We have on our Georgia Weather Network, we have the chill hour calculator where you can go in and type your location and find, what the typical chill hours there, and that way you can kind of match it up if you're wanting to try to plant peach trees on your property. So just some basics of fertilization of new plantings. Um, I say this on this one, but this is something that you're going to want to do for really planting any fruiting tree or bush, and we will see it, or you'll see it a few other times on this presentation. But perform a soil test before planting. You're going to spend money to plant these trees and have high dreams and hopes to hopefully have fruit down the road. For peaches, you want a pH of 6 to 6.5. Apply lime as needed to raise that pH up to 6 to 6.5. And follow those recommendations on your soil report. They'll usually give you a detailed fertilizer schedule. But these recommendations, as far as the first year, apply 1 pound of 10-10-10, 4 to 5 inches from the trunk in March and May. Second year, apply 2 pounds of 10-10-10 and 6 inches from the trunk in March and 1 pound in May. And the third year, apply similar year 2 and adjust amounts by crop load. So this is more of a generalized, whereas with performing a soil test, you get more of a specific recommendation. So this is something that you'll see continuing on through this presentation. But always keep in mind that if you do take a soil test, you're going to get a more detailed report on exactly what you need to do, to ensure that quality growth. So peaches and nectarines planting, and really this goes for planting any fruit tree, and really just about any plant in general, as far as trees or larger bushes. As far as the actual planting of it goes over here as far as the pictures. In most plants in general, perennial plants, you're going to want to plant in December through February while these species are dormant. That way they're not trying to establish um, in the spring through the summer when it's 90 something degrees outside. Um, Most people don't think about planting during the winter because you don't see these fruit trees and bushes out in front of their local hardware stores or Home Depot. But in reality, the best time to plant them is during the winter. Um, you're going to want to space them 15 to 20 feet apart if you're planning on planting more than one. Digging that hole is twice as the width of the root ball and deep enough that it's basically planted as the same as it was in the pot that you bought it in. Digging it twice as wide as the root ball, is important to allow those roots to spread over time. If you just dig a hole as big as the pot, it's going to have a hard time, breaking that soil, that harder soil that hadn't been dug, and you might not get as good of a root establishment. Spread the roots out in the hole as much as possible, and then firming that soil around the stem. And then, we're always, water soon after planting. That way you can go ahead and get a head start. Mulching, also, very important, not only for weed control around these species, but also for water retention and also for protection from freezing temperatures. Believe it or not, when these are planted at a young age, they can, the cold weather, when it gets down really, really cold, can cause some damage. But this mulch here definitely helps to insulate and not allow that to happen. So pruning. Pruning is, as far as peach trees go, is very important, and it starts from the very beginning. You're shooting for an open center or a vase shape, meaning I like to describe it to people when I'm talking to them. Imagine that you're creating a place for a flying saucer to land on top of. So you think of an alien spaceship, of circular flying saucer. I like to think of it as they could just come and land right on top of it. So basically that means you're going to look for 4 to 5 main scaffold limbs. Those are going to be your main fruiting limbs. And everything else, as far as that goes, that's vertically, you're going to want to get rid of. So at planting, this would be when the tree was first planted. You're going to want to remove here and here. You're going to want to go ahead and select maybe 4 to 5 of those main branches that are going to end up being your fruiting branches down the road. And this is, with fruit trees and and peaches and apples, people think you can just plant them and let them go, and that is just not the case. You decide, or your potential for quality fruit is decided from the very beginning on when you plant and how you prune. So this would be that tree after pruning, that first year right after planting. This would be that tree after 1 year. What I would do is it would be to come in here and remove that there up, and then I would even come in and trim these off here, and just to have about 4 or 5, and you're slowly just working that tree up as it gets older. This is obviously a more mature tree. The same applies to pruning mature trees. You see the main scaffold limbs here. You have one. That one kind of comes off that limb, but nonetheless, you have about 4 there. And you can see here this fella, after he got done, what you're kind of working with here. You want to try to remove any growth that's going inwards towards the tree or inwards towards that base, because that's going to reduce airflow. uh, in the canopy of that tree and cause or potentially cause more disease issues. And also, the more the more leaves you're growing on a fruit tree is the less fruit you're growing. So that's important to understand when pruning. As long as you're pruning correctly, you know, the less leaves, the better. As far as granted, you want to have enough leaves for good photosynthesis for the tree, but you want it to just be on the limbs you want it to be. So that's probably about as clear as mud. But in a short summary, that's about as quick, uh, a quick summarized version. So pest management. Peaches, I did my graduate school work on peaches, and actually I did fungicide trials. But I'm just going to be frank and honest with you. There, peaches and nectarines, and nectarines are just about even worse because they don't have the fuzz to defend them like peaches do. Um, you have very heavy fungal and insect pressure on peaches here in Georgia and in the Southeast in general. It's very difficult to do organically. Um, it, you know, if you can find some, excuse me, I didn't mean to go forward. If you can find someone to grow an organic peach and they're doing it 100% organically, it's pretty impressive. Um, with that being said, um, this would be kind of a typical spray schedule for for even homeowners, and this is the same spray schedule that essentially we followed, just with some different fungicides. During the dormant year, you're going to spray dormant oil for overwintering scale and mites. Um, San Jose scale is a big pest insect. They basically just overwinter on the bark of the tree. You're going to want to cover the entire bark with a dormant oil, and it'll help suffocate and kill them. It'll also drop some of the fungal, overwintering fungal spores on the bark of the tree as well. So you do get some benefit there. This is a spray that I would definitely recommend for homeowners to not miss, as you do get a lot of reduction in both overwintering insects and some fungal reduction as well. At bloom, this is, really a critical spray. You're going to want to apply Captan or chlorothalonil or myclobutanil. These are your conventional fungicide products. If you're wanting to try to be more on the organic side, sulfur is a product that you can use. Um, during the early spring, you can get away with using sulfur all the way up through, shuck off, as opposed to a conventional insecticide, a conventional fungicide. Um, the only negatives there are that you are limited somewhat with sulfur, as it's easily washed by rain and dew. So you don't quite get the efficacy as a normal conventional fungicide. Petal fall, shuck split, and shuck off. These are all stages of growth, which in hindsight I should have just put those on here instead of the disease pictures. But nonetheless, petal fall is when the blooms fall off. Shuck split is when the baby peach is starting to emerge from the flower, and shuck off is when the flower falls off the baby peach. All of these are specific spray times. You have to spray it all, really at all. Well, bloom, petal fall, shuck split, and shuck off. I would consider all of these almost essential if you really want to have quality fruit. After during shuck split and shuck off, that's when you would go ahead and add an insecticide, such as malathion, permethrin, carbaryl, lambda cyhalothrin. You can use neem and insecticidal soaps if you want to be more on the organic side. Not quite as efficacious as a normal insecticide, but that's obviously up to you. The negatives there as far as that goes is, once you get into the summer, some of these neem and oil products can be phytotoxic, meaning the heat Once you get over 90 degrees, it can cause some foliar damage to the trees. Um, and so that's just something to keep in mind. With some of these organic products, they do have some limitations. Um, so summer cover slash pre-harvest sprays. These are the same as the previous. Essentially, a fungicide and insecticide on 14 to 21 day intervals, depending on weather. Um, if say we turn off dry, you can get away with spraying more on that 21 day, scale. If we're more wet, every about 10 to 14 days, you need to be applying a fungicide to protect, and insecticide to, kill any of those invading insects from causing some of this damage you're seeing here. This is oriental fruit moth damage, very common that you'll see in most homeowner peach trees when they're not spraying. Stink bugs they cause a lot of damage. Leaf-footed bugs, they look a lot like them as well. These are two of this is number one. This is our number one most devastating, not only commercial, but, for most homeowners, when you get a call from one of them, 99% of the time it's brown rot. And this is, essentially, if you don't spray your peaches, you're going to have brown rot. If you might get a couple, but brown rot is a really, really hard one to control. Scab, more of an aesthetic disease. Nonetheless, it does open up some wounds for brown rot typically. So if you have a lot of scab, typically brown rot becomes an issue over time. And y'all feel free to stop me if y'all have any questions as we go along. So we'll swap over to apples and pears now. Another one that's, there's a reason why not many folks grow them commercially here in Georgia anymore. The management intensity is relatively high. For pears, I would say medium as far as management intensity. They're typically a little bit more hardy, as opposed to apples. It just depends on what varieties, you're growing there. Sunlight needed, once again, 8 to 10 hours. Self-pollinating, no. Most apple trees require cross-pollination from other varieties to set fruit. This is important to understand because, if you're going to just buy one apple tree, you're probably not going to get very good fruiting. So it's good to check your pollination charts. Certain apple trees pollinate others better than others. So that's something, do your homework before, just going out and buying, one or two apple trees. Also check check apple and your pear growing zones for cultivar selection. Goes along with the cold hardiness zones that we spoke about earlier. Different sizes. This is one of the benefits of apples is, they do have different sizes as far as their growth habits. You get your standard, which is 20 foot or taller. These would be your grandma's apple tree that you see, most of the time that are still standing these days. You have a semi-dwarf variety, which is about 50 to 80% the size of the standard. A lot easier to manage as far as picking, pruning, spraying, things like that. And then you have a full dwarf, which is 30 to 40% the size of the standard, and require a support typically by a trellis or a post of some sort to keep that tree upright, because the weight of the fruit can typically cause some drooping and some issues down the road. As far as planting goes, like I said, just follow the same type guidelines as peaches and nectarines. That hole twice as big as the root ball, and just as deep as it is in the pot that you receive it in. So fertilization of new plantings, perform soil tests preferably. If not, the first year, 1 cup of 10, 10, 10, 1 month after planting, and then again in June. The second year, in the early spring of the second season, broadcast 2 cups of 10, 10, 10 again in June. That would be, when right before bloom, when it's putting on leaves. The third year on, you'd want to increase the diameter of the broadcast circle and the amount of fertilizer by 2 cups per year until 6 years of age. And then at that point, only nitrogen fertilizer is needed. So like ammonium nitrate here, after year 6, there's plenty of phosphorus and potassium in the soil. You just want to fertilize with nitrogen in the spring, and you should be good to go. So pruning, this is another one that I get a lot of questions about, or it's too late. I shouldn't say too late. You can always correct them, but it helps if you start right when you're planting apple trees. So the thing is, you're going to want to try to prune to a central leader. And what that means is at planting, all you want to have is a whip. You call it a whip. When you plant it, you don't want it to have any stem or any limbs coming off of that planting. You're going to want to reduce the size of it by about a quarter at least. And then over time, you're basically looking for a Christmas tree shape, more or less. And the central leader means that no other limb should go over your central trunk. The idea is that to allow for adequate light exposure throughout the leaves canopy, and increases airflow and lowers disease levels, and this also increases fruit quality. Like we're talking about earlier, you want to have good quality leaf growth, but you don't want to have too many limbs, because then the tree's just supporting too many leaves and not focusing on putting that energy into fruit. So you see over time here, these checkered marks would be the ones that were removed. So this would be your main central leader, and then you might leave one here, 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 and maybe there's one on the other side there that you leave. Those are going to be your main limbs. Over time too, you're also going to want to try to develop good quality crotch angles, meaning try to shoot for that 45-degree crotch angle, because wider crotch angles allow for a heavier fruit load. The narrower the crotch angle is, the more tendency, once it gets weight on the end of that limb, the more tendency it has to snap. So if you can use, here in this photo here, you see limb spreaders, and you can make your own limb spreaders, but creating those wide crotch angles to kind of spread everything out, and kind of go for that Christmas tree, more or less that Christmas tree shape, is important. And this is what I'm kind of talking about. The day you plant your tree, whether it be an apple or peach, is the day that you begin to prune and train for future production. So just keep that in mind if you're wanting to plant an apple tree or a peach tree for that matter. So pruning neglected trees, this is something a lot of folks call about and want me to come out and look at their apple trees that have they moved to a new property, or Trisha Willis, she asked, can it be too wide? I wouldn't want to, you don't want to promote it, out, like this, trying to shoot for that 45 degrees. And, depending on each tree is different, I understand. So the the idea is if you do this even somewhat, as opposed to just letting it grow naturally, um, it's going to be in a lot better shape than if you were to just let it go. Um, but yes, essentially, yeah, it can be. You could technically do it too wide, so that's why I try to say that 45-degree angle at least. So the neglected trees, um, the first step really in pruning neglected trees is going to be to um, remove all the upright, vigorous growing shoots off of your main scaffold limbs. I mean, this is just a mess here. This is one of the only pictures I could find with a before and after type picture, but um, removing those upright shoots coming off of your bigger limbs is no, step number one. Um, Step number two is going to be to essentially you're going to try to select 3 to 5 main limbs, just more or less like you would as a young newly planted tree, um, and select those and then kind of prune, and obviously with a good crotch angle, hopefully as close to that 45 as you can get, um, that are spaced around the tree. Limbs with poor angles and excess scaffold limbs should be removed. And then over time, considering how overgrown it is, you might have to spread that out over 2 or 3 seasons. Um, you know, Ideally, you can get it done mostly in one dormant season. However, if it's really, really bad, you might just need to allow it, maybe two years worth of dormant pruning. So pest management, much like peaches, um, I would say it's medium to heavy fungal and bacterial insect pressure. Medium meaning on the peach side, or excuse me, on the pear side. Heavy being more on the apple side. Um, so you got a lot of pest pressure on apples, just the same as peaches. Difficult to do organically. Just a few of the main diseases we deal with here. Um, this is apple scab, bitter rot here, cedar apple rust. This is one I see a lot around here, on a lot of different, even on crab apples and things like that, ornamentals. Um, you got fruit moth damage on fruit there. Um, this is one here that's inevitable. This is one of the worst diseases on apple trees and pear trees. Is fire blight, which is a bacterial disease. One thing you need to know about fire blight is that there's no uh, thing, you can't treat it once it's there. The only thing you can do is prune it out. However, we'll talk in a minute about um, what you need to do as far as hopefully preventing it, um, you know, that year, because it's inevitable. If you have peach tree, or excuse me, apple trees and pear trees, this is going to be something that you're going to deal with um, I shouldn't say very regularly, but pretty regularly. Um, there are resistant varieties, um, to fire blight, and that's definitely something you should consider. If you can, find a variety in your area that works as far as with our hardiness zone, that's something I would definitely recommend. Would be trying to buy a variety that is resistant to fire blight. Um, the same as in peaches, you're going to apply that dormant oil in the dormant season, December through February. I mean, you could even go as far as applying it 2 times. It's not going to hurt. Doing it once in December and once in February before they start putting on leaves um, would not hurt you there. At silver tip to 1/2 inch green tip, you're going to apply uh, a copper fungicide, a copper hydroxide. These are commonly sold at Home Depot, Lowe's, most farm supply stores. Um, this is a very important spray here for particularly fire blight. Um, this is one you don't need to miss if you're an apple grower, or you have a home apple tree, or a newly planted apple tree. This is one you don't want to miss, because if this gets on and starts taking off on especially a younger apple tree, sorry about that, you are going to have, it's going to take it down relatively pretty quick. So this is one you do not want to miss. Tight peak to cluster, Captan or myclobutanyl in combination with an insecticide containing malathion, bifenthrin, or permethrin. Bloom, I would rotate if possible. If you applied Captan at tight pink, I would apply myclobutanyl at bloom. Myclobutanyl is a really good product if you've been dealing with apple cedar rust. This is something I would recommend putting on at bloom if you've been dealing with that. Petal fall, same as bloom, preferably rotating between the two, Captan or myclobutanyl. There's other fungicide products, but these are just mostly commonly used products, or common products for homeowners. Early fruit set to pre-harvest. This is the same as the type pink cluster with an insecticide based on what you're seeing. Some insecticides are better than others. It just depends on what you're primarily dealing with. This is where your scouting comes in play, keeping a close eye on your trees and, the fruit. Are you seeing Japanese beetles? Are you seeing, fruit moth damage, or it just depends on what you're seeing. You may not even have to spray this at all. But once they start putting on fruit and they start ripening, usually the insects come. So coddling moth is one that we see a lot of damage from all over the southeast and really everywhere that apples are grown. So changing gears just a little, I'm going to hit on a few of some of these are going to be more quicker than others as far as that goes, because just for time. I'm going to hit on home garden figs for just a minute. I personally like figs, not just for eating. Because number one, their management intensity is overall pretty low, especially if you get these varieties that are. Here's a variety map. For here in our area in the Piedmont, Celeste, Hardy, Chicago, Canandria, Country. Even up in here in the mountains, granted you're in marginal, but there's still varieties that you can work with. At least 8 hours worth of sunlight needed. Most figs are self-pollinating, which is a good thing. They typically they can tolerate a little bit more of an acidic soil, from 5.5 to 6.5. However, I would trend kind of closer to this, 6 to 6.5 if possible, just to give yourself some wiggle room. Fertilization, you're just applying 10, 10, 10 3 times a year to the bushes you're trying to bring into full production in the early spring in mid-May and July. Mature bushes can be fertilized just once a year in the early spring with up to 5 pounds. This is dependent on bush size. And as far as pest management goes, most of the time, relatively low disease / insect pressure on figs. They can have some rust issues from time to time. Some fruit rot problems, but majority of the time that's after the fruit have been, mature for a while, or not for a while, but early maturing or something like that. But honestly, the biggest issue that I've had with people with figs is yellow jackets. I've had several folks call about how do you control yellow jackets on figs. And I should have put a picture of it on here, but um, how to do that is to just make yellow jacket traps, and that's basically a 2 liter bottle, and you cut the top off of a 2 liter bottle and you turn it upside down and basically make a funnel. And then you can put in the bottom of it, you can either leave some soda in there or make your own concoction with apple cider vinegar, sugar, and like a banana peel. And those yellow jackets will fly down in there and obviously not be able to get back out. So if you're having trouble with yellow jackets getting on your figs and tearing them up, that's something you might consider. So just a quick on home garden pecans. I do get a pretty fair amount of question about pecan trees as well. Mostly with bearing trees, not a lot of folks are planting pecan trees up this way. But because obviously they do take a long time to really start producing. However, this mainly pertains to bearing trees that we're working with here in the Piedmont. So management intensity, I would say low to medium. Obviously, if you're going to plant them, you need to plant them in a place that gets 8 to 10 hours of sunlight a day. Fertilization is very important for pecan trees. A lot of folks, they call and they say, well, my pecan tree doesn't produce. It used to produce a ton of pecans every year. My first question is going to be, what's your fertilizer or what's your fertilization looking like? Most of the time they haven't fertilized. So just as a basic thing for fertilizing pecans, in mid to late March, you're just going to want to apply 4 pounds of a complete fertilizer, such as a 10-10-10. And I use 10-10-10 a lot because it's available just about everywhere to everyone. You're going to use 4 pounds of 10-10-10 for each inch of trunk diameter. And you're going to want to measure this at 4.5 feet above the soil level. So up here along the trunk, granted these trees are shorter, but let's just say that's 4.5 feet. You would measure it there, and obviously that tree would get the max amount, up to 25 pounds per tree. You're going to want to do that out in the drip line of the tree, that whole 25 pounds out along the drip line of the tree, starting out about, I'd say about a foot and a half from the tree out. Another thing to keep in mind is that water, just like any other plant, water has a huge effect on pecan production than any other environmental factor, even more than fertility. The most critical period for water use is during the first 2 weeks of September, typically when it's relatively it's obviously very hot, in most of Georgia. It's been studied and proven that as much as 350 gallons of water per day can be required by each tree during the nut filling stage to really put on that good quality fruit. You got to water your trees. I know that's not what most folks want to hear that have home pecan trees, but if you want to have them and have a good quality crop, then watering when it's not raining is something that you need to be considering, even if it's not 350 gallons, just some. So lack of sufficient water during that will obviously lead to poorly filled nuts and poor nut quality and increased alternate bearing, which is something we get a lot of, we've had a lot of the past couple years. We had a drought last year for about 2 months. And we had tons of folks calling, why are my pecan trees producing? Well, we had a drought and you didn't water them. So that's something, you need to understand. If you have pecan trees and, you're not willing to water them, you need to temper your expectations some. So just something to keep in mind. So blueberries, this is one of my favorite fruiting bushes or fruiting plants in general. To grow here in the state of Georgia. We're actually the #1 blueberry producing state in the United States. primarily obviously down in South Georgia, along the southeast side of Georgia. Um, Management intensity, I say very low. Um, you know, blueberries are native to the southeast. So obviously our cultivars now are improved as opposed to the wild varieties that grow, you know, here in the Piedmont and the southeast. But nonetheless, they are adapted to our climate and our soils here. Sunlight needed at least 8 hours. You know, you can get away with planting these in shadier places that maybe receive filtered light or six hours a day. However, temper your fruit production expectations a little bit if you're dealing with a more shady site. Um, Taking a soil test prior to planting, despite the management intensity being low and they do grow well here, I would recommend taking a soil test because you're going to want to avoid sites with higher than 900 pounds of calcium an acre. Um, Calcium can cause issues with um, with the absorption of other nutrients such as potassium, specifically phosphorus, somewhat as well. At these high levels, um, typically these aren't an issue in the Piedmont unless it's in an area that's been heavily limed in the past. Maybe an old garden site. This actually happened. Someone planted some blueberries and they weren't doing too well, and I went and took a soil test, and it was over 1,000 pounds of calcium an acre. And lo and behold, it was supposedly an old garden site. Um, so the good news is a soil pH of 4.5 to 5.2 is plenty adequate for blueberries. And honestly, if they're much higher than 5.2, you could get away with 5.3, 5.4, maybe even up to 5.5. But really much higher than that, you're going to want to apply sulfur to lower that pH back down to this range. They prefer that more acidic soil as opposed to really just about every desirable plant that we grow, vegetable plants, fruit trees, all like that kind of middle ground, 6 to 6.5. However, blueberries, that 4.5 to 5.2 is perfectly fine. So that's why most people have success growing blueberries without doing too much, because you literally can just put them in the ground and let them go. Self-pollinating, I put no here, which is kind of misleading. You can plant just one blueberry plant and it will flower and put off some fruit. I say some, but to have really good fruit, a good fruit set and an ample amount of fruit, you really need to plant more than one blueberry plant, meaning the same as apples. They have a good pollinators for each one. So say you plant an Alapahaw, which is a variety that was, most of our blueberries here in the southeast were created by the University of Georgia. So say you plant an Alapahaw, or you want to plant Alapahaw blueberries. You want to go on and check a pollination chart for which variety pollinates Alapahaw the best. So basically, which other variety is going to bloom at the same time for good cross pollination. So this can be an issue for a lot of people who just say, "Oh, well, it's a blueberry; it's easy. You don't have to. You just plant it, and it's Keep in mind you need to plant more than one if you really want to have good quality fruit and have that good pollination. Check those pollination charts. As far as varieties or species, there's northern high bush, southern high bush, southern low bush, and rabbit eye. I personally recommend rabbit eye varieties. Why? Because they are the most homeowner friendly. That's quite simply as to put it. they're they were they were taken from here in the southeast and basically made into and bred for to be better fruit producing. So rabbit eye varieties, if as on a homeowner level, I would stick with those. Not saying you can't grow northern high bush or southern high bush here, but to me personally, there's no reason to when a rabbit eye blueberry produces excellent fruit and has very low maintenance as well. So so planting, this is something you definitely want to get right. Uh, you know, just simply put them in the ground. You can get away with that, but doing it the right way goes a long way. So if you're planting them in rows, you're going to plant 5 foot apart and leave 12 foot between rows. Tilling the soil 8 to 12 inches to allow that good rooting zone area in a band at least 3 to 4 feet wide. That way it has space to spread. The roots have space to spread. Um, this is pretty good picture there. Granted, I wouldn't plant them that close together, but nonetheless, kind of that's kind of how I would want to prepare the ground. Um, Blueberries do definitely do better and respond well to mixing in a wetted peat moss or pine bark with the soil in each planting hole. Um, so that addition of that organic matter tends to help get them going quicker. Um, so depending on the hole, as far as whether you get the plant at a 1 gallon pot or a 2 gallon pot or a 4 gallon pot, um, you know, that's just kind of on feel there. I would say between 2 to 4 gallons of pine bark or peat moss, around that plant, in addition to some of that soil obviously that you dug out of the hole. You're going to want to transplant at the same depth as the plant grew at the nursery or in the pot. Firming and mulching the soil after planting. Blueberries really do well, and honestly, they need to be mulched. Not that they can't grow without mulch, but they do really well with mulch around them. That helps, with weed control and moisture retention. So that's definitely something I would recommend. Fertilization of new plantings during the first year of establishment and after leaves emerge and new growth begins, apply 1 ounce of 10-10-10 per plant. Fertilize at the same rate again in May and July. So you have, 3 times there. It's not a lot. 1 ounce. You can over fertilize blueberries, and you will burn them up if you're not careful. So just make sure you're only using 1 ounce when you plant. Spreading that fertilizer evenly in a circle about 18 inches with the plant being in the center. Don't pile the fertilizer up on the plant stem. Start out about 4 to 5 inches from the plant and do it in about an 18-inch circle. So in March and July, the second year, apply 2 ounces of 10-10-10 or 12-4-8. Or 3 to 4 ounces of azalea special fertilizer 488. This just giving you some more options there. Increasing that to a 24-inch circle in diameter with the plant in the center. From the third season on, base the amount of fertilizer applied on the size of the bushes. So from the third year on, it's not technically a mature bush, but you're basically just basing it on the growth. Apply 1 ounce of 10-10-10 per foot of bush height at the time of bud break, which is when it first starts putting on buds and they start putting off leaves in the spring, and then after harvest. So after you pick the berries in the summer, you're going to want to fertilize again. Continue to increase the amount of fertilizer yearly until the bushes are about 6 to 8 feet tall. Once they reach that size, they should receive the maximum rate of about 6 ounces of fertilizer per bush, so about 1 ounce per foot. and that's all it is. It's it's not a lot of fertilizer. It's not pounds or anything. It's just once they get up about 6 ounces. So pruning, um, you could let blueberry bushes go and never prune them and still get fruit. But with that being said, some light pruning work does help with disease issues, and renewing that plant over time, because you are going to get some older canes over time. So the first year, this is something I definitely recommend doing. Um, Removing any flowers or fruit that has escaped the pruning process in the first year. You don't want um, you don't want that plant going to fruit the first year. You plant it in the dormant part of the year. Um, you do not want that plant focusing on producing fruit that first year. When you see it starting putting on fruit or flowering, get the flowers off of the plant. You want that plant to focus on continuing to strengthen that root system and grow its root system, as opposed to putting off a few fruit. A few little blueberries is not worth the overall health of that plant down the road. So just keep that in mind. Once 4 to 6 feet in height, a cane renewal pruning program should begin. Basically, that's going to be removing older canes, 1 to 3 older canes, depending on the scenario, um, and then allowing a new cane to come from that older cane and take its place. Over time, you will slowly renew the entire bush. So, as it gets, old, obviously 4 to 6 years takes a long time, but um, when they're more mature, you do have to start considering pruning those older canes back and allowing it to rejuvenate itself. So you can continue to have berry production over time. So pest management, as opposed to putting a full spray schedule on here, um, the best thing about blueberries is they're native to the Southeast. They have a high resistance to disease and most insects, and most of the time they require little to no spraying for most homeowners. For commercial guys, they can't really afford to lose a lot of fruit, so they do have the spray. Um, However, for most homeowners, you can afford to lose a few berries, um, to disease or a few insects. Um, so, granted, over here we do have, a simple spray schedule without any actual fungicides. These are just some of the things that you tend to deal with. Mummyberry being um, one of the worst, botrytis, exobasidium. If you are going to spray, I would definitely recommend at bloom, or excuse me, when they first start putting on leaves at bud break, bloom, and really, honestly, that's about all you would really need for a good fungicide program. Insects typically not an issue. You can get some leaf miner damage, blueberry maggot, but if you ever have any issues with insects on your blueberries, just give your extension agent a call. But typically, not too much of an issue. So, home garden blackberries, another one of my favorites. I just love blackberries and blueberries. They're delicious, and they're relatively easy to grow. Management intensity, I would say low to medium. Sunlight needed at least 6 to 8 hours. Soil pH 6 to 6.5. So with blackberries, you have trailing varieties and erect varieties, meaning more of, with trailing being more of a vine and erect being more of a bush. Each one has its pros and cons. However, you're going to plant them at both really at the same time, January through early March. I would even say even late February. Maybe not. I wouldn't go too far into March, but you can get away with planting them in March. Trailing varieties will require a trellis, meaning a wire support of some sort. We'll get more into trellis systems here in a little while. But Technically, erect varieties do not have to have a trellis. However, for heavy crop loads, which are very common with blackberries, especially these newer varieties that you see here, these thornless varieties, Apache, um, some of these newer varieties definitely can benefit from some sort of trellis system to support them. Um, so either way, really, a trellis system of some sort or a support system for these is important. Just some simple fertilization, applying 2 ounces of 10-10-10 in April and July of the first year. Scatter the fertilizer evenly over a circle 2 feet in diameter, centered on the plant. Um, Over time, a pruning program will need to be implemented. Um, didn't what I could get into some detail about a pruning program for blackberries, but if you have any more questions on that, then I can definitely uh, talk to you about it later. But it's kind of complicated to explain. But um, basically, it's just a renewal program, a lot like blueberries, but you have to select the canes depending on age. So, overall, you have low disease pressure for the most part and insect pressure. However, in some instances, some pest management will be required as far as, they're kind of like blueberries. It's not an issue until there's an issue. So just keep that in mind. But overall, I would say relatively an easy and rewarding fruit, bush, or plant to grow. So on to muscadines, one of our popularly grown home garden, species here. Really, I mean, all over the southeast. Um, Muscadines is, I mean, in my opinion, the fruit of the South. Maybe that and blueberries, but I would say management intensity low to medium. Um, and I say medium because of the pruning that we'll get to here in a minute. But overall, low in disease and insect pressure for the most part. Sunlight needed, definitely need full sun, 8 to 10 hours. Soil with a pH of 6 to 6.5. Self-pollinating, yes/no, meaning they're perfect flowered varieties, meaning they self-pollinate and produce their own fruit. And then there are some varieties that are female, which must be planted with a perfect flowering variety for fruit. So that's important to know and understand when you're searching around to find a variety to plant, or you just go by Home Depot or whatever, to know whether or not it's a perfect flowered or just a female variety. So a wire trellis will definitely obviously need to be erected to support the vine. I say there's a minimum of 20 foot of trellis per plant. Gives it plenty of room to run. I like to recommend to plant on the post, or excuse me, by the post, about a foot away from the post, and then run the trellis this way and that way. And allow the vine to run both ways. So, because the crop load is typically heaviest in the center of the vine. So right there, kind of near where the top of the vine is going to be kind of where, your heaviest crop load is. So like I talked about earlier, this is kind of a basic trellis system, your single wire system here, with the trunks next to the posts. You got your arms of your runners, and then your spurs, your fruiting spurs that come off of those. This would be a double curtain trellis system, where it's basically the same thing. You just have 2 arms coming off and running down both sides on the wire. So, like I just spoke about, a properly trained vine has a trunk or 2 to 4 arms and fruiting spurs. Basically, your first couple years after you plant these vines are basically just training. You're just going to try to train that vine and get it to climb to here. um, or to here on this single wire. You're basically just pulling it up to here with a string. A lot of people do it with a string, or they may tie the vine to the post and then use a string to get it up to the wire. Um, Once you get it to the wire, you're going to want to select one or two, depending on if it's a a 2-wire system or a 1-hour system or 1-wire system. You're going to want to select those one, that one fruiting arm this way, and then theoretically there's another wire on this side. Um, select those arms to go either way, and you're really going to want to try to keep it on to one main arm running down those wires. Um, and that's basically all this that I just talked about. But you don't want to have multiple arms if you can help it, because it's just a lot of wasted growth when you could have just one running along each one and put off fruit off each arm. So just some simple fertilization. Not a lot of fertilizer required by these guys. Half a pound of 10-10-10 after the plants have been settled by rain, and then 2 ounces of ammonium nitrate or 3400 in late May and early July. This is just to help them get going, to help them really start actively growing. Broadcast each application over a 2-foot circle. Second year, timing and method are the same as the first year, just double this rate, and increase the diameter of the circle to 4 feet. The third year, if the vine has grown well in the first 2 years and you expect a crop, apply 2 pounds of 10-10-10 in March and 1 pound in May. And then, you're just increasing that once again by 2 feet around the plant. If you already have established vines, applying 3 to 5 pounds of 10-10-10 or an equivalent per plant in March of each year, and then apply about a half a pound of ammonium nitrate 3400 around June 1st. And that's going to help with good growth there in the spring, and then with fruiting there in the summer. So it's not really too difficult, just 3 to 5 pounds there in the spring, and then a half a pound in June. So just some simple pruning, and this is where the management of these guys gets a low to medium ranking, and I say medium because of the pruning. Yearly pruning is needed for muscadines. You can't plant them and just let them go. It's a yearly task. This is something you need to just go ahead and put on your schedule. I'm going to be pruning my muscadines this time of the year. Every year once you plant them, after they really get established. You're going to want to try to prune them in February through early March. And the whole point of this is when you leave too many buds on the vine, the plant overproduces fruit, and the fruit are poor. So that, once again, the idea is to really focus that plant's growth in a few areas to produce quality fruit and quality leaf growth, and kind of limit the amount of clutter more or less on the vine and on the wire, and hopefully produce some good quality fruit. What you need to know is that fruit are born on new shoots arising from last year's growth. So say this guy here, this is how most folks, homeowners, muscadines look. They typically have 3 arms or whatever, which it's theoretically you like to have one, if you can help it. But if you end up having 2 or 3, then that's okay too. But I like this picture because it's a good representative of how you prune muscadines and leave spurs. You're going to try to leave about 3 inches on your spurs, with about 3 to 4 buds, 3 or 4 buds on each spur, and you'll see them, 1, 2, There's probably 3 there. There's 1, 2, 3 on that one there. So 3 to 4 buds on each one, and that'll help cut down on the amount of because if this was left unpruned, this is going to continue to grow. This continues to grow here, and you're going to have buds all along these. You're going to get a lot of leaf growth and not a lot of good fruit growth there. Whereas on this vine here, you're going to get all your growth right along here, and you should get good quality fruit growth from there too. So with that being said, I know I kind of sped through that, but that's a broad scope of fruit tree management or planting management, fertilization in Georgia. I know I just hit most of the common ones, here, but I appreciate y'all taking the time to listen today. I hope you learned something. And if you don't mind, I'm going to type in the chat box just a simple little evaluation. Just did you learn anything about fruit management in Georgia today? I appreciate it. And if y'all have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Miss Miller, yes, it will. I will be. I recorded the presentation, and I will be uploading it to the Stevens County Extension Facebook page within the next day or so. So if you have a Facebook, I can also put it on our website, the Stevens County Extension website. And it should be there within the next day or so if you want to refer back to it.